Alright everybody, so in this series I'm going to be taking this Shay and taking it from its current state with cracked gears and a motor that probably doesn't run very well, and we're going to get it up to modern standards. We're going to put new gears in it, we're going to put a decoder in it, we're going to break the motor in and the drive line, and we're going to get this Shay running to tip-top shape. And if you're watching these videos as I'm coming out with them, at the end I'll actually be selling this engine. So I'm going to try to keep these probably about 4 or 5 parts as short as possible, so I'm going to jump right into it. You can see here, these are things I think we're going to need during this this work session. We're going to need a screwdriver, an X-Acto blade, we're going to need some heavy gear grease, we're also going to need some lighter medium grease, and we're going to need a DC controller here to test the motor with. So I'm going to get right into it. So the very first thing before I do anything with these Shays is I make sure the motor is good before I change the gears, before I put a decoder in it, before I do anything. First I want to make sure the gears inside the gear tower are okay and the motor is okay. So we're going to pull those out first and see how those are. So the first thing you're going to do is come to the bottom and take out these 2 screws. They're quite small. Don't worry about anything underneath here. There's no springs that are going to go flying or like a gear that's going to fall out. It's actually pretty tame underneath here, so don't worry too much about what's underneath here. This cap, this little angle bit goes towards the front, so when we put it back on, we're going to make sure that goes back towards the front as well. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take these 2 screws off, here and here. Is it those 2? I think it's those 2. To get to the motor. There's that one. And that one. And these, don't worry about mixing these screws up, because those first 2 screws and these second 2 screws are the same. So we don't have to worry about getting those mixed up. So with those 2 out, this whole motor assembly is going to pull out just like that. And you're going to have these 2 wires coming out from it. So what I'm going to do, this is the way I do it, just because it's easier to work on the motor with it detached from the locomotive. I take my X-Acto knife and I slit along this heat shrink just to get access to the, while that's doing its thing, I'm going to turn the soldering iron on. Should have done that beforehand. And we're going to just slit down this heat shrink tubing to get access to those wires. Just pull that old heat shrink off, and that gives us access to the wires. Don't worry too much about which wire goes to which. It really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter for DC. Well, I guess it does matter for DC, because then the engine would run backwards, but I guess it wouldn't. I don't know. But don't worry about too much which wire goes back. If you're really paranoid about it, you can see that one of these wires has a little white marking on it. If you wanted to, you could take a Sharpie or some white out or something and make a little mark somewhere here that you know this white wire goes back to this area here, but I really don't worry about it. So hopefully this soldering iron is heated up enough. Let's see if we can desolder these 2 pads. Nope, not quite hot enough yet. Oh, there it goes, maybe. Nope. Give that another second. There it goes, that first one. And now the second one. Alright, so now we have the motor and the cylinder assembly detached from the locomotive. So we can pull that back. And so now we have the motor free. So now what we needed this DC power supply for is we're going to test the motor by itself. So what I like to do is try to find something to put the motor up on top of. We'll put it on top of this lid right here, just to get it up off the working surface and give the cylinders room to cycle. So now I'm going to take these 2 alligator clips All right, clip them to the leads on this motor. And then I'm gonna give it some power and we'll see what kind of life we get out of this motor. So it seems to work in that direction, and we'll do the other direction. It seems to be working good. So we know the motor is good. I have had sometimes when the motor is just completely dead and it just doesn't work. So we're gonna take these allocator clips off and we're gonna get to the back of here. So it's hard to tell probably, but inside behind this gear there's a brass worm gear coming off the motor. And so what we need to do is we need to put some grease between that brass worm gear to this gear right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little dollop of this heavier grease. I'm just going to put it in there between that gear and that worm gear. That is plenty, just like that. You could probably use something, find something better to do or use to put that on than your screwdriver. Then what we're going to do is you're going to come over here and with your lighter weight oil, you're going to put a dot of glue between those two gears right here, between the gear tower and the cylinder assembly. Then what we're going to do is we're going to put a drop of oil here, one back in here, that here, and here. And then if you look, it's probably hard for my cameraman to get these, but there's the piston goes up and down inside the cylinder up here. So you just put a little dab of glue there, or glue. Don't use glue, use oil. And just a little one here. All right, so that's all lubed up. So now we're gonna reattach our alligator clips. And give it some power. And I give it about half throttle. And I'll run this now for at least 20 minutes, closer to 30 minutes in each direction. So we're gonna do that and then we'll come back. Alright, now that this has been running 20 minutes in each direction, I'm very happy with it, and you can see here how well it runs. So it runs nice and fast, and it really runs nice and slow. So I'm happy with the performance of this motor. It's running very smooth, very happy with it. So with that, the motor is all broken in, the gears are all broken in, everything's lubed up and running real well. Now I'm confident we can move forward with putting gears and a decoder in this. So the rest of this video is going to be me putting this motor back in the engine. So you can kind of see why I like getting the motor and the gear assembly out of the locomotive. It really does make it a lot easier to work on, and it's really not a big deal. Getting this thing out of the motor, out of the engine and back in. So first thing I'm going to do is take this heat shrink. I really can't tell you how big this is, but I mean, if you can look at the end of the X-Acto knife, you can see this is pretty small heat shrink. I have a spool of this. Like, this will last me 10 lifetimes, and I got this for like $3 on eBay or something. So this is what I use. So I'm gonna cut about maybe about a 1/4 inch probably of this heat shrink, just like that. And then, I'm sorry to my cameraman, but I am going to get in your way. This part can be a little fiddly. Sometimes prop the engine up a little bit like that. All right, so now again, I don't remember which wire came from where. I'm really not worried about it. So I'm gonna bring my soldering iron in. Alright, we're going to do this in real time. So remember, before you solder your wires, always put your heat shrink on the wire. If you don't put your heat shrink on before you solder, you're going to have a bad time. You know, that one might be a little too long. shorten that just a little bit. That goes on. There's solder standing by. Let's see if I can do this. I've never done this on video before. I'll probably edit this all out. Alright, that's looking pretty good right there. So you can grab a little bit of solder, tap it on there, and that's all you need, just like that. Then, scoot this heat shrink down over that. Then use the heat shrink or the soldering iron, and you just kind of hover it over it, and that'll contract and shrink that heat shrink. It doesn't take much. You're just protecting that joint from touching the die cast body of the locomotive and causing a short. Alright. Same thing with this one. Put the heat shrink on your wire before you solder. Made that just a little too long. Put that on. You know, if you're looking at this and you're thinking, man, this is too much for me. I can't do this. You're taking stuff apart. You're cutting stuff. I want you to realize that what we're doing here, if you boil it down to it's basic parts. All we're doing is soldering a wire here. It's a little fiddly, but hopefully that's what these tutorials are for, is to show you guys that this is possible. It's not that hard. Got a little solder, and I have complete faith in you guys that you can do this. Just like that. So, and, you know, I'm really passionate about these Shays, and I want as many people to get their Shays up and running and off the shelf and on their layouts. So now I gotta scoop this heat shrink. This one's gonna be a hard time. Oh, you know what? What's going on here? There it goes. Just scoop that on over, just like that. And again, hover your soldering iron over that heat shrink just to get it to shrink just a little bit. Doesn't take much. Alright, so now we're going to get this back up into the boiler. And when you do this, there's one thing you need to keep in mind. A lot of times this little tension rod likes to get in the way. It'll be between the motor and this mount right here. So when you do put the motor in, make sure that doesn't get caught in there like that. And that's happened to me almost every time. So you put this back in there. You just gotta make sure that rod doesn't get stuck in there like it's trying to. And that just cinches right down. Make sure everything's there. And you grab your grease covered screwdriver. Again, if you remember when I took these off, the first screws and the second screws are the same, so don't worry too much about which one came from where. They're the same. You don't have to make these too tight, just get them snug and then give them an extra, just a little extra. I want to make sure this tension rod isn't caught up in there. This one isn't somewhere it doesn't belong, which it's not, so we're okay. Pull this down like that. Okay, so if you remember, this little angled goes towards the front of the locomotive. That goes on there. Put these screws back on. Alright, and now without missing a beat, we're going to go straight onto putting this on the track that's there on the workbench. And hopefully it works. I have these drive shafts outside of those slip joints still. So we're going to put this on the track. Just like that. Alright, so now we're going to hook these alligator clips to the track. And hopefully the motor runs. Works great in that direction, and works great in that direction. So that will conclude the first part of this probably 4 or 5 part series. We got the motor. First of all, we made sure the motor runs, and it runs well. We lubed up that metal worm gear, and we inspected all the gears in the gear tower, made sure those were all good. And yeah, so now we know that the motor part of this install is good, and this locomotive is a good candidate to move forward with new gears, which is what we're going to do in the next video. The next video is going to be an in-depth tutorial on replacing the gears and the drive shafts on this, and then after that we'll do the decoder. So thanks for watching this first part. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below, and I'll get back to you. And stay tuned for part 2 coming soon. Thanks so much for watching.